You're listening to Catholic Family Podcast. Episode 15.
I'm Kevin Davis. Thanks very much for listening. I'm joined again by my dad, Dan Davis, who is coming on to talk a little bit about authority. It's a subject that we discussed with Eric a few weeks ago now, a few shows ago, and talking about a book by Frank Sheed called Society and Sanity. And one of the main topics of the show and of the book is how we need to follow authority because it is divinely appointed, and exactly what that means and how we can apply it to ourselves today. And it's a very complicated topic, so I want to say at the start of the show that we are both not moral authorities, we're not theologians, we're really just having a discussion about it, to get the topic out there rather than trying to tell you what is right and what is wrong. We could be wrong on this topic. We just want to kind of get the discussion because we think it's important and something that's very viable to today's time. So, Dad, thank you for joining the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Kevin.
And so, so you want to kind of piggyback a little bit from the last episode with Eric. I mean, where exactly do you want to start or comment about that last show?
Well, let me start with a compliment. In fact, it's probably about the highest compliment I can pay you guys. So when I listened to the second of the two episodes, I actually was at the airport and I was getting ready for a flight from Phoenix back to home to Omaha, and I was early, so I had about a 2-hour delay waiting for my plane, and I listened to the podcast and actually spent the next 4 hours, 2 hours at the airport and then 2 hours on the plane, thinking about that podcast and thinking about authority and all the things that you guys discussed. And if you think about it, I mean, what better value can you add as a podcast? That's 4 hours I could have been thinking about the Denver Broncos, or I could have been thinking about something on TV or some distraction or whatever. But here we are, going and trying to lift our minds and hearts to God and think about moral authority. So think about this real quick. If when you listen to a priest on a Sunday give a sermon, that priest is speaking with the authority of the church behind him. He's speaking on behalf of the church. And our task in that case is to listen, to absorb, and to apply what he says to our lives. It's a very different thing. When you and I or you and Eric or whatever, we're making a podcast, we don't have that moral authority. We don't have the same authority. Instead, what we're trying to do is we're just trying to make you think. And that's really, I think, the highest form of response that we can get on this kind of a show.
Yeah, thank you. And that's definitely what we're aiming for, is to get people on their own to try to come to these conclusions, and then if they have issues, to bring it to a priest. That is definitely right. And thanks. I'm glad that did strike a nerve, and I think that mainly thanks to Eric for putting so much time into that show, into an extremely interesting topic, because I know for us here in Germany, and I think in the U.S. as well, there is a really big dilemma about masks, about following laws that we believe to be unjust and even insane at times. And I think that, I think it's an interesting thing and I'm happy to talk with you about it today.
Yeah. And what I thought you guys did was you created two, what I'm calling boundaries for this discussion. Okay. So on one hand, the one boundary was all authority comes from God. And that, I don't think I had ever thought about it in quite those same terms, because this was an aha moment for me. This notion that all civil authority comes from God. And I looked. In fact, I even looked up the quote from our Lord in St John chapter 18, that he's standing before Pontius Pilate, and Pilate says to him, "Speakest thou not to me? That knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and I have the power to release thee?" And Jesus answered, "Thou should not have any power against me unless it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me to thee hath the greater sin." Okay, so I mean, I've struggled with that. We read it every year during Holy Week, and I've kind of always struggled with not in agreeing with it or believing it, but just in understanding exactly what it means. And I think that the discussion with you and Eric kind of helped give me some context that, yeah, this was our Lord saying that all civil authority, be it Nero or the Caesar, as you guys talked about, or Pontius Pilate, came from above. So I mean, that was a great boundary. The other boundary that you set out for the discussion is that on the other side, we're compelled not to obey orders that violate Catholic faith or morals. And you put out the example, I think, of Saints Peter and Paul and some of the early martyrs who died for their faith. And of course, there's no question they were operating according to the faith. So these are two true and good boundaries to any discussion on civil authority. But there's a veritable, if you think of these as sidelines of a football game, there is a veritable Super Bowl of moral dilemmas in between. And that's what I'd like to explore today. Okay, so I've got five, we'll see if we can get through them all in the time we got, but we've got five moral dilemmas that I've kind of laid out that are kind of in between these two boundaries that you set up with civil authority. And each one's a historical event. What I want to do is I want to kind of lay out each moral dilemma and then the proposition that we have to consider with each, okay? So the first one here that I want to look at is the American Revolution. And the moral proposition that I would put out is, if all civil authority comes from God, is it therefore morally permissible to dissolve one form of government and replace it with another, okay? Now, and it's a very good question, I think. Now, if you look at the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Now, there's a lot of truth, I think, in this, and basically the bottom line is that our rights as human beings come from God. They don't come from the government. And but from a Catholic perspective, there are a couple of zingers in the preamble, and I don't know if you caught them, but real quick, I'll go through those. The life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they may be unalienable rights, but they're not really Catholic unalienable rights, right? We're not so much interested in life as we are the afterlife. We're not so much interested in liberty as we are obedience to proper authority. And we're not so much interested in the pursuit of happiness as we are the pursuit of heaven. So that's a little bit of a, what I call a zinger in terms of, not necessarily Catholic theology. And then the other one is I said that governments do not derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. They derive them from God himself, okay? So the Declaration of Independence, I think, it's not a Catholic document, right? It does present a fascinating proposition that when government becomes destructive to the ends associated with our inalienable rights, men have a God-given right to abolish it and institute a new one. Now, what we have to keep in mind here is that the Declaration of Independence was in the Constitution were written by kind of a consortium of Protestants and Freemasons, even like Thomas Jefferson, and you had some Catholic input on the whole thing. But really, this is not a strictly Catholic document, but it does lay out some very interesting, principles in terms of our obedience to government. Now, what I want to do is look at the second of these moral dilemmas, and then talk about not what Protestant, founding fathers of America wrote, but rather what St. Thomas Aquinas had to say about it. So my second moral dilemma is the Mexican Cristeros. And the Mexican Cristeros, for anybody who's not familiar, it was a widespread struggle. It was in central and western Mexico in response to the imposition of articles of it was the 1917 Constitution of Mexico, which basically 1917 they were taken over by communists, much like Russia, and these articles of the Constitution, they were perceived as anti-Catholic, and they're measures that were trying to impose state atheism, very anti-clerical, very anti-church. I think they're known as the Calles or the Calles law, and the proposition with the Mexican Cristeros. These are the basically the freedom fighters, the Catholic freedom fighters who rose up and fought against the Calles government with the intent of actually overthrowing it. If you've never seen the movie For Greater Glory, it's a fantastic movie that kind of documents the Mexican Cristeros. So the proposition here, is it justified to use violence against a sitting government with the intent of overthrowing it if that government is unjust? Okay, so that's kind of what we're looking here with this second moral dilemma. Now, what I did is I went in to see not what a bunch of Protestants and Freemasons had to say about it, but look at what the beloved Dr. St. Thomas Aquinas had to say. And I pulled this not from source documents, but from a legal essay from a site called lawteacher.net. But it basically pulls from St. Thomas Aquinas. So St. Thomas, he firmly believed that citizens should obey those in authority. Okay, basically your boundary that you and Eric discussed in your podcast. He justifies civil disobedience under two circumstances. One is civilians can disobey during the reign of a tyrant, and the definition of tyrant we'll get into in a minute, or when the government enforces unjust laws. Disobeying a tyrant can be justified because the arguments can be both valid and sound. The overarching theme is the common good of the state. And the common good, it's a decision that's beneficial to all members of a particular group. And it's significant. It's central to St. Thomas's writings. He talks a lot when it comes to social doctrine. He talks a lot about the common good. It's kind of a theme through the Summa. And he believed in general that civil disobedience is unacceptable as it prevents unity in law and the common good. So in order to preserve peace in society, obedience to the government is expected of all citizens. That's kind of our native state. That's our base expectation, is that we should be obedient to the government. Okay, so far so good. Now, God, though, sets standards of how a good ruler should act, according to St. Thomas. Above all, he act in a godly fashion, obeying and revering God. He must follow and govern according to the divine law, which is always just. He also has to be a man of integrity to avoid falling into the temptation that comes with material prosperity. And Aquinas admits only a few individuals possess these characteristics. And I'm guessing Joe Biden is one of them, right?
Right. According to liberals, yes.
Yeah, according to liberals, right. So, but now the key I think with St. Thomas is understanding his definition of a tyrant. A tyrant's a ruler that does not abide or rule by God's divine law, which makes him unjust. His greed for money or other human desires makes him use violence upon his citizens, disregarding the common good of his people. Since a tyrant fails to fulfill his role as a just ruler, he becomes the cause of instability and disharmony. A ruler, number one, of a just society, he's providing stability and harmony for the people. And when he does that, that's when we need to obey, because we have a basically well-ordered society. So the laws he creates, the tyrant, are unjust because they ignore divine law, and through his ungodly actions, he leads people astray into sin. So in that instance, civil disobedience is justifiable when a government, when the laws of a government are unjust, or the leader is, in St. Thomas's terms, a tyrant. So he states in the Summa that God has given authority figures the ability to create rules they are competent to judge. Rulers are only qualified to make laws that judge the exterior behavior so that it contributes to the common good. I mean, you kind of see in this little creeping in today's world of thought crimes and and interior types of behavior. But since authority and power were given to the ruler by God, citizens are obligated to obey the laws made by the ruler. However, the laws rulers create must be based on natural law, which in turn is based on divine law. Okay, so you see where the disconnect starts to come with unjust governments, and how we have the right to certainly disobey that which is.
So I guess I would ask then. I mean, I would say when you look at the Cristeros, that argument seems extremely valid. They had a communistic government that was really oppressing them and shutting down Catholic people and shooting people. I mean, really pretty extreme and crazy as far as I know. And that seems like a fairly obvious case of a just revolution. Now, I don't know, is that the same case in the American Revolution? I mean, I would say that King George was a bit nuts, and maybe there were some things that were not super nice in his rule and control of America, but I wonder if that would have been a case of actually just rebellion or not.
No, in fact, that's an excellent question. I was asking myself the same thing. That basically what you had a young country that was 3,000 or thousands of miles away from its ruling its ruling government and ready to self-govern. But yeah, I don't know that King George really necessarily qualified as a tyrant per se. The battle cry in the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. Well, okay, yeah, no, I get it. That's a problem, but is that really tyrannical? Because certainly a government who is overseen or is over a certain people has the right to collect taxes. I mean, that's gone back forever and ever. So no, in fact, as I thought this through, it is an interesting thing that the American Revolution, the Cristeros makes a lot of sense because they were basically just protecting their own. But the American Revolution was, I don't know that you can say 100% that it was, the right thing to do. And you'll notice too, as I was kind of studying this, even with the Cristeros, that the Catholic Church did not really come in and weigh heavily on the behalf of the Cristeros. I think that was something they were hoping, was that the church would provide them the moral authority to help change the war itself. And the church never really did. I mean, they gave them some support, but they did not come out and condemn the Mexican government or to call their cause just publicly or anything like that. So the church, I think, following that basic standard that all power, all civil authority descends from God, stayed somewhat moot on that. So I think, it's definitely fascinating.
It seems too that the church is, in all of its wisdom, knows that if it starts picking any battles politically, like any at all, that you will eventually lose because it does. I mean, if one side overthrows the other, who knows that you're going to put in a perfect form of government? And I think that's one of the general issues, that if the Americans rise up and overthrow, King George, are they going to set up this great form of government? Now, we're fortunate that they actually did set up a pretty good form of government, and that there were some wise men, even if they were Masons, that actually did help to form a country that was in general formed on the natural law and basic morality. But what if it hadn't been? What if they had overthrown King George and George Washington had come up and been another, maniac or anarchist or whatever, and say the church had backed the Americans rather than the British, for example? So I think it makes sense that the church just says, this is not our realm. I mean, our realm is saving souls. It is not in overthrowing governments.
Right, exactly. And I think St. Thomas even calls it a mortal sin to be overthrowing a government without a plan to put a truly virtuous government in place. Okay, so I mean, and basically what we're talking about there is anarchy. But even there, if you're just taking and swapping one bad leader for another bad leader, then you are guilty of the mortal sin of basically creating social disharmony.
Well, look at the French Revolution. I mean, this is exactly what happened, right? I mean, the people rose up and said, okay, we're going to do like they did in America, except it obviously ended up much, much worse than it did in America, that they just randomly killed all the royalty, and then, other lunatics took their place. And so, yeah, it shows you that this is rebellion and revolution in overthrowing monarchies or any form of government. It doesn't just randomly work. I mean, you really have to have a plan. And again, why the Cristeros makes some sense. If it had worked, they at least were led and under a cause that was truly Catholic, that was more, in my mind, like a march to the Holy Land, kind of like a crusade somewhat, than it was just a rebellion.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that you can be pretty certain that they would have established a true Catholic monarchy. And to get to one of the points that you made in the podcast with Eric, that basically the way you have to look at it is God, either through his active will or his permissive will, either wills or allows these governments to take place. And for whatever reason, it's not something we understand, but for whatever reason, he allowed or willed the communist government in Mexico in 1917. And then when his troops, his people, tried to overthrow, he either willed or allowed that they not win that victory. And so I think that there is to a certain degree that we have to accept that our state in this life is just one that can be precarious. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but it's something that I see out there with today's world, that I know that there's still a battle kind of going on behind the scenes between Trump people and Biden people, and Trump people are still thinking that, if we don't take things back over soon, we're going to take them over in 2022 or 2024 or whatever. And one of the scary things that I see sometimes is folks, and I think they're mostly Protestants, but they're going to say, you know what, God's on our side. We're going to win. God always wins, and God never loses. And so I think that they've kind of equated almost like the Jews who were looking for our Lord to overcome the Romans, and that was his use to them. As I worry a little bit even about this idea that because God may be, because I would say the Trump people are maybe a more godly or God-fearing type people, we assume that God's going to, God's going to see to it that we win this battle. We may not. If you were living in King Henry VIII's England, and you had the terrible tyranny of Elizabeth I, and you were assuming, okay, God's on our side, he's going to take care of this, and he's going to make sure that we get proper authority back into place. Well, here it is, 400 years later, and 500 years later, and we're still, that's still the Protestant government in charge there in Great Britain.
And that's another interesting story too of rebellion. I mean, there's a really fascinating book that I remember reading in high school called The Storm Out of Cornwall, where a small little county in England was the only one to rise up against Queen Elizabeth and her Protestant, dictatorship, really. And they all were killed and really destroyed and massacred. But it's a beautiful story, in my opinion, led by a supposed descendant of King Arthur, and just kind of rose up and gathered the people to march on London. In that case, again, I think that would be, in my opinion, absolutely a valid rebellion. It didn't end well, as you say, that God's end is not our end. We can't even try to fathom God's plan, and if we do, it's foolish. And I think that's a really good point to really emphasize, that the political battle is by far one of the smallest battles that we can fight right now. Now it's a battle, and it's one that we should fight, because at least a little bit. If we don't, then the bad guys will win every time. But I think that the bigger battles are your cultural battle, and especially the spiritual battle, because the battle spiritually, as we've been told by St. Paul and in our Lord, that our fight on earth is not against men, it is against demons. We are actually fighting against demons in a spiritual battle, and that if we don't pray enough, if we don't suffer enough or sacrifice enough, then that the political battle and even the cultural battle, they just don't matter.
Right. And one of the things I know I try to basically, I take comfort in the idea that if you think about the final judgment, the last judgment, the point of the last judgment, I mean, we're all going to be judged individually, but then on the last day of earth, we have this, I think it's in the book of Matthew, you have this huge final judgment, the day of the Lord. God comes down, he separates out the sheep, he separates out the goats, and we all get to see the virtues of the good, we all get to see the evils of the bad. And here, we may have suffered. I watch people like Maxine Waters, and I watch Mario Cuomo, and these just absolute reprobates, and they have power that I could never have, and they seem to be immune from being held accountable for their actions. And it's just, you see evil flourish and flourish and flourish, but that on the last day all of this gets sorted out, and so we will head into heaven and head into hell, and we'll know that in the final analysis everything was absolutely perfectly 100% just for eternity. That was maybe unjust in this life, but yeah, it really shouldn't matter, because it's about eternity that we need to be most concerned, not about what's going on in this life. So I mean, if you want to look at, I don't know if I would say necessarily that politics is just pure entertainment, but I think you almost have to look at it that way. It's not something that needs to be a primary focus of our life. It's something that needs to be kind of a secondary consideration. How am I going to take care of my family, and where's this world headed, and things like that, but not one that we need to put up as a false god.
Right, totally. And I think we should absolutely vote. We should be aware of what's going on, and we should be able to tell people likewise. I don't think any of the politicians are actually moral, but at least some are better than others, and some are extremely bad. And I wanted to mention too that, as you say, of course, it matters much more than anything else, how we are judged at the end, and that will all make sense. But I think you can also look at it as a human side. Look at the history of the bad guys and the good guys. Look at Nero and look at St. Peter and St. Paul. Even historically, Nero is looked at as being this evil creep, while St. Peter and Paul are obviously looked at as being, these holy men, who spread a lot of good, even if you're not Catholic, even if you're not Christian. So I think it's all just temporary. And I think this power that they have, that they flourish in it now, but even worldly wise, it will end very, very soon. And already Cuomo was a perfect example. It's already ending for him. His run as this creepy governor of New York it's done. It's over. And his time in the limelight is finished. And now someone else will probably take his place. But it just shows you again that evil in this world, especially, it's really temporary for the people who let it rule their lives.
Right. Well, and one of the things, a little story I like to tell. Back in the day, I had basically an upper management type job in a school district, and one thing I learned, to work tons of hours and work late at night and all this, but I was near the top of the food chain there, and one thing that I always noted was that the people at the top of the food chain were almost always miserable, and they might get some momentary momentary joy from a decision they made or something they were doing. But they almost always seem to be miserable people. The ones who were the most joyful, the most fun to work with, they were the janitors that I would see late at night, and they were scraping by. They'd always tell stories about how they barely had any money to spend and how tough their life was, but they were just full of joy. And I think that it was kind of a little bit of a microcosm for me of the notion that when you're putting all your eggs into the basket of worldly success, it's going to lead to misery. And it's kind of one of those things when you lose everything, that's when you can find your real joy.
Yeah, exactly. And I know we're getting a bit off topic, but I want to mention real quick that Ina was brought up today, a quote by Chesterton. And unfortunately, I don't remember the quote, but it went something like, the way we imagine freedom or the freedom that we take as people makes us much less free. And I think that's a really interesting thought, that I think that we think of freedom as being given the choice to do anything we want. And it's actually a miserable thought. It is actually against really our Catholic beliefs that's not at all what we want. We actually want rules and structure. And I think you see that also in the work world, that I think we have too many choices. I mean, back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, say, I would have just probably taken the exact same job that you had, whatever trade that you had as my father. I probably would have taken that over. Now, okay, I guess I had, we have a bunch of boys in our family. I have 6 boys, so maybe that would have been a little harder. But there just weren't so many choices. And I think that you took a job and you worked it for your entire life, and you were happy with it, and it was okay, and it was a simpler life. And now in our modern progressive world, when we have all these great opportunities, they don't really make us that happy. I think that we think they do, but they eventually it's too much for us.
Right. And I think you see people living together in cities and in real tightly confined areas, and you see them on social media all the time. And what ends up happening, you would think that it would make you kind of part of this large, humanity. But I think what it ends up happening in a practical sense is it actually kind of makes us islands unto ourselves and almost dysfunctional. I mean, I hear these stories about children on social media, and they're 10, 11, 12 years old, and they have parties, and they go to each other's houses, and they sit on the couch and they text each other, and it's just because that's kind of this weird world, weird reality that we've gone when you think we should be more connected, we actually kind of become strangely more disconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And the more we think we progress, and the more that we think that our society is at its height, at its apex, it really isn't. I did a show, I recorded a show that I'll produce here, publish here in the next few weeks, about the devolution of music. And it's really fascinating to look how music has devolved with society. And anyway, yeah, it's really fascinating to see how we think everything is so great, and then you start taking a step back, and it's like, yeah, well, not so much. And I guess so. To get back on topic, that society, part of the issue we have with the society right now, obviously, is our authority, especially in the U.S. and here in Germany. I think many people are very unhappy with Frau Merkel. And so the question is, or I don't know where you want to jump to now, but what's next? What should we do?
Yeah, well, let me go ahead and kind of jump forward. I've got a couple other case studies, but save those for another day. But let me kind of jump forward to where I think we are now. I look at the whole Donald Trump phenomenon, and I think that there was a trap that got set up, and I know I fell into. I think most people fell into it. That here we elected this real flamboyant, very intelligent businessman. He came in and he had a plan, and he was going to overcome the deep state, and he was going to basically turn things over for a better, greater humanity, and all of the bad guys were going to be thrown in jail or executed by military tribunal or whatever it was. And I think that in reality, we all kind of felt like he had this little magic wand that he was going to wave, and all of a sudden everything was going to be better, and life was going to be all of a sudden all goodness and light. Well, the reality is that was never going to happen. I don't think the deep state, the evil we're fighting against is too ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's too firmly entrenched, and there's just no way that one man in 1 or 2 presidential terms was going to overcome it. And so what's happened, I think, and this has been the real eye-opener for me, is I really struggled as the election came, and the obvious election fraud, and hey, what's Trump going to do about it? And he's going to have this magic aha moment, and he's going to ride in on a horse, and he's going to be the president again. Well, as all of that kind of faded and drifted, and we kind of woke up to this reality of a Biden presidency for however long that's going to last, what it really dawned on me was that, you know what? The hero of this story is not Donald Trump. The hero of this story should be us. It should be God. It should be, it should be 80 million of us who are overcoming this evil, and not one man, and us putting all of our hopes in that one man. So the question becomes, how do we go about being one of those 80 million or however many people it is, maybe a billion worldwide, these people who are going to overcome this evil? Because I think we can do it. Number one is, I think that we need to take care of our fundamentals. Okay, go back to basically the baseline of we do our prayers. We it's Lent now, so we do our Lenten penances. We do our spiritual reading. We get our own spiritual house in order. I don't know. I know that you like to listen to Jordan Peterson, Tom, and we've been listening to him here. He's a fascinating character. He's probably the most Catholic, non-Catholic philosopher I've seen out there. I mean, he just speaks a remarkable Catholic game, but it's just from pure intelligence and it's not from being Catholic. But he says, and I think he really, and he's talking to college students more than anything, but he says this so beautifully. He says, do you want to change the world? Do you really want to change the world? Go clean your room. And what he's basically saying is, take care of yourself first. Be the light that we need in this world. Don't go and just start rallying or, burning buildings or whatever. That's not the path. You got to clean yourself up first. And so number two on my list is kind of along those lines, is that we need to be joyful. Joy needs to be our native state in our life. One reason, I think one of the key reasons, is because the devil wants us fearful. And that's what we see that with COVID. We see that with the mask. We see this with basically this descending tyranny on us worldwide, is the devil wants us to live in a state of fear. The opposite of fear for us is joy. And so I think that to the extent that we can be joyful in our own lives, we can be joyful with the people around us. That's another way that we can really help. I mean, defeat the evil. Yeah, maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. But I mean, in the meantime, obviously, we're sanctifying our own souls, which is our number one consideration. So that's number two. Number three on my list is to band together with like-minded people and try to get the doomsayers, try to get the ne'er-do-wells out of your life, and find people that you can connect with. Ideally, not on social media. I think that for me, I've basically gotten off of social media. I was there at one point with a pretty big following, but I think unless you are a legitimate influencer, somebody who is helping to mold the thoughts of others, I would get completely off of social media. But use your traditional means of going through and finding people who are like-minded. Maybe they're your neighbors, maybe they're your families, your long-term friends, people at church. Make an effort to stay after Mass and socialize after church. You want to make the world a better place? So I went down to Arizona a couple weeks ago and got to meet with got to go to Mass with Father Gronenthal and that grew, and it's probably the most flourishing, upbeat parish that I've seen. And you can feel the energy, but a lot of that energy comes from the fact that they stay after Mass, and Mass may be over by 10 o'clock. It's a 9 o'clock Mass, and they're there until 1 or 2 in the afternoon. They bring lunch, and they're just there talking the faith, or they're talking current events, or they're talking whatever, and they're building this community of like-minded believers. And when the devil comes in, what he wants to do is he wants to isolate us. And to the extent that we can then get with others who believe as we do and see that we're not isolated, there are plenty of other people who see what we see, that are sane, and see the world as it is. And to the extent we can do that, I think we really, really help ourselves in terms of helping our own souls, but also helping in the fight against evil. So,
and I think I want to add real quickly onto that too, that there aren't just so many sane people. I think we also have to realize that there are many, many people being woken up to the fact that the world is going absolutely, positively nuts and totally insane. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people who are not yet sane, but want to be so. They realize that they have been living in insanity, as Frank Sheed would say. And we got to remember that too, that we need to also build this. I mean, if it's our neighbors, if it's our friends, if it's our families, to not be afraid to go and say, hey, do you want sanity? Do you want truth? I've got it. We have truth, and we have to be willing and able to share that.
Right. And as people are getting awakened to the reality out there, and they're getting, you can call it red pilled or call it whatever, as they awaken, one of the things that's really important, I see this comment out there a lot, and it's a good one, that says that the worst thing we can do is to go to them and say, I told you so. Okay. That's totally counterproductive. What we want to do is take those people and help them, bring them along, welcome aboard, treat them a little bit like our Lord treated the laborers in the vineyard, right? He gave everybody a denarius at the end of the day. We need to make sure these people are welcomed with open arms and they understand, in addition to seeing the truth, this is where the joy is. This is where the cool kids are these days. If you look at the other side, the world that you're escaping, it's a world that is dour, that is angry, that is, and it's dysfunctional. And just, this is a better, nicer world that you're coming into, and show them by example, and help welcome them aboard with open arms. So yeah, that's definitely another key aspect to this thing. I also, as you get into more practical day-to-day things, what can I do to actually help in the political fight? I like simple visual reminders. We have a Trump sign out in front of our house. I mean, it's kind of almost a form of rebellion anymore, and not really so much in Iowa, but if you got bumper stickers, if you can find fun, inspiring memes that you can send along to your friends, just to keep things light and to keep things visual, and just it's almost like a political version of statuary in our home, right? We surround our homes with that which we love, and ideally it's statues, and it's pictures of the saints, and it's images of our Lord and our Lady, and all that. And I think that to the extent that we can, on a lower, more temporal scale, we can kind of help fill the world with positive visual reminders of things, then that's a good thing. And then I think number 5 for me is that I think that we do have unjust laws that are worthy of disobeying. And I think the big one right now is masks. And I think that, you're even seeing, I don't know if you've seen this over in Germany, but they're now talking about, you need to wear 2 masks, not just 1 mask, and it's almost like this is basically the powers that be have put their thumb down on our necks and their boot down on our necks. And now they're basically just rubbing our nose in things and saying, yeah, 1 mask is not enough. You need 2. And so, for me, it's not going to be true for everybody, but at least subjectively for me, I think the mask is a sign of that tyranny, of the unjust laws. And so when I get an opportunity, and it's somewhere, especially locally, I'm going to go into a Walmart, I'm going to go to the gas station, I'm going to go to a restaurant, and I'm not going to wear a mask. Okay, you want to make an issue out of it? We'll make an issue. I probably won't make a scene, but we'll make an issue out of it. But if you can show people, if you walk through a Walmart and you're one of 2 people not wearing a mask, how many people who are wearing a mask are seeing that and thinking, man, I'm a coward, aren't I? I really should be fighting this. And you may not inspire direct action that day, but your example is something that I think, people can launch from.
Yeah, it's a really big question, and we talk about it a lot here in Germany, because here in Bavaria especially, we have rules that we have to wear these special masks that are really thick and really hard to breathe in. Honestly, they're really uncomfortable, and they're really pretty ridiculous. There's absolutely no science that says that masks help against coronavirus, and if they did, why do you have to stand to get apart from each other? And if that worked, why do you have lockdowns? It's all nonsense, and I think most people understand that by now. I'm not saying coronavirus isn't real, but the things the laws put into place clearly are against common sense. And that's been the case for many months now. You can't just lock down a country for 8 months and think that's going to work. It's absolutely insane. And so actually, I mean, for many companies in Germany, and I know in Italy, you had a mass opening. I think you had 50,000 restaurants just say, enough, we're done with you. We're all opening on the same day. And I think they did that over Telegram or Twitter, or I'm not sure how they communicated, but they communicated together and they said, okay, this day we're going to all open. They opened up and the government couldn't really do anything about it. As far as I've heard, the government just kind of let it be. And so that's a really good question. I think that, in my opinion, also is a good form of rebellion. It's not bloody. Right. It's against these draconian rules, but it's in a way that you're standing with your fellow people and saying, enough, these rules do not make sense. They are absolutely against our rights, and we are going to fight them.
Yeah, exactly. And so kind of on that same note, the next item that I've got in my list of things we can do is support the patriots. Okay, there are plenty of politicians, there are business leaders, there are people all over, and I think especially the politicians who are legitimately fighting for us. Okay, I look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a new representative here, who's just doing. She actually on her first day, she drafted articles of impeachment against Joe Biden. Okay, and which is just a fantastic first move for her. But she's right out in front of center. She's I think she's been removed from all committees. There was a move in Congress to actually have her removed from Congress. But you got others like Lauren Boebert, and you got Devin Nunes, and even Donald Trump. Do what you can to support these people. Write them a letter. Put a positive comment. Go follow them on Telegram and put a positive comment there for them. Hey, I'm behind you. I'm here for you. If you can give money, or whatever support you can give. Support these people because they really are on the front lines fighting for us. I don't know what you have over there in Germany, but you got to have something similar.
It's much more complicated over here, honestly. I think you do have some decent politicians, but it's a different system. It's kind of more, I guess, parliamentary, and they have it's not two parties. You have many parties, and the right wing party is really regarded badly. Let's just say that. They're regarded as Germans from the 1940s. Let's just say a certain German party, which is, I think it's obviously extreme hyperbole, but they're also not a party that, they don't get everything right. They get a few things right. So anyway, I don't know a lot about German politics, but I don't know if there are that many people you can really get behind. And I think that's a big issue in Germany, that there's not a lot of hope in German politics. There's really no sign of getting out of where we are. And I think that, in my opinion, obviously, again, learn about it, read about it, try to do your best about it, but you almost just have to disregard it here. I mean, I think some things like, hey, let's all open up our businesses together to fight against the man. But in terms of politics here, it's pretty grim. It doesn't seem like it because Merkel is your anti-Trump, right? She's your placid, boring woman. But that's in my opinion much worse than even than Biden, because Biden, like Bergoglio, they're these clown shows that they're absolutely nuts. They're showing their colors with every word they speak. But here in Germany, it's much more intelligent and led by people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, you just don't have the highs and lows. I think we're kind of blessed for it here, but we do have a lot more extremes, and that can make for extreme bad if you live in Michigan and Gretchen Whitmer is your governor, but it can also be very good if you're a freedom fighter and you're looking for a fight. So I understand with Germany, it's really more mushy.
But I think it leads back to one of your points about just living with joy, that you just can't let this stuff get you down. Because, I mean, right now, I don't know who your representative is in Iowa or Whitmer is in Michigan. Maybe Whitmer is done in 2022 and you get a great, awesome Republican, patriot in, and then he's gone in another 4 years, or she's gone in another 4 years. And so you have this in and out and in and out and in and out. And the values of these people are so rarely intertwined with ours. Sometimes they are. And we should, like you said, totally support the ones that do, because there aren't many. But don't lose your joy because of it. I think that's so important. Don't lose your faith. Don't get distracted by it. Just keep living a happy life as best you can, and focusing much, much more on the faith, because politics eventually will always let you down, always. And that's proven through history, that there will never be a continual good form of government. Right.
Yeah. Your mom and I were talking about this a little bit the other night, that if you look at our society, I mean, what generation in the entire last 2,000 years that the history of the church could have survived a 60-year run of papacies that not only, I mean, it wasn't bad enough that they were wicked or they had they were adulterers or whatever, but actually fought ideologically for the enemy. Okay. Right. I don't think there's any generation in the history of the church that could have survived that for 60 years. Now you add on top of that mass communications and the availability of information and Hollywood and the mainstream media and all these things, that basically bottom line is because we've lost that spiritual leadership. We are so broken as a society that, I don't think that Donald Trump can get in there and all of a sudden turn us back, to the light, as much as we'd like to think that he could do that. So you almost have to accept that, we live in a world that is just broken and getting more broken all the time. So what do? We find our joy in that. We appreciate the little things that we have, and we kind of try to learn to just not necessarily laugh at it, but kind of turn away from it and say to the world, you are not going to bring me down.
Exactly. And I think that a good example of that, I just read a book about St. Benedict in the time of St. Benedict, and it's really fascinating because I think most people know the story of him, finding the monastery in Italy and kind of his rule, and that's kind of the common knowledge. But I actually didn't really understand the historical era in which he lived, and he lived in Italy that was governed at the time by the Goths. So really governed by like a mix of Arian pagans. So a really kind of a nasty mix of people who were in control of Italy. And the Italian people were obviously very upset about it and prayed and hoped and really, really wished for the Byzantine Empire to come and to defeat the Goths and to take over again, so that the Romans could be Roman again and led by former Romans, or at least by, people who were once part of the Roman Empire. And so what eventually happened is the Byzantines actually did come. They did defeat the Goths, and the Byzantines became a much, much, much worse form of government than the Goths were. And they taxed the people, and they really oppressed the people much more than the Goths had, because the Goths had a much more simple version of rule and actually ruled better than the Byzantines did. And so these people in Italy who had prayed for years and years and years to be freed actually ended up being much, much worse by the people who came to free them. And in this whole time, St. Benedict is on top of his mountain, just, obviously praying and trying to lead souls to heaven. And I think that's a really perfect example of eventually you got to be careful what you wish for, because if you get so caught up in just hoping for this worldly freedom, it oftentimes just doesn't work as you think.
Right. And it's part and parcel. I think the bottom line here is you got to go back to your basics. We're as mankind, we're fallen since the Adam and Eve ate the apple. We're fallen as a people, and always will be until the end of time. There's not going to be a utopia here on earth, and it's really just for us to get through this valley of tears and know that our home is in the next life. And I think that is the temptation. I know I fall for this myself sometimes. The temptation is to think, we can turn this earth into our home, free energy and no debt and all this fun stuff. But you're right. I think we might find out that even if we got there, it might be worse than we could ever imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the moral, I guess, in my mind is that we as families, especially as the fathers of families and anyone, even if they don't have families, as your own unit, try to be like St. Benedict and form this little haven of your own, because that is where you can actually find a little paradise on earth, that you can create this little piece that is heavenly. And heavenly doesn't mean without suffering. It just means it is more godly, I suppose. It is something that you spend your time trying to reach heaven and to lead a good life and to have a simple rule. And I think that's really what people crave and what people need. And I think that if people read more about these saints, about St. Benedict, about the monks and the nuns, they had miserable worldly lives. So they really suffered greatly and wanted to suffer greatly and tried to suffer greatly, but they were the happiest people you would ever possibly meet.
Right. And to kind of circle back to where we started the discussion here. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you've got this podcast that I think that's your aim here is trying to, I mean, if you're trying to go through and make this a good Lent, right? And you're trying to raise your mind and hearts and minds to God. I can tell you, I don't know what we're on now, episode 15 or something like that. You got a few extras in there, extra podcasts in there. And I can tell you that I got to give a plug to your mom, my wife, Lisa, who's done two excellent pieces on the calendar of the saints, especially February was just super, super fascinating. But if you're really looking for something to uplift your soul in this, go back to episode 1 and go through and just spend, maybe one a day or a couple a day and just listen through all of these episodes of these podcasts, because that's exactly what you're trying to do, is help us, have a good mechanism for getting through this life.
Yeah, thanks. And that is exactly right. And that's why anyone listening, if you have a good topic to talk about, if you have a good story to tell or something that you think would be beneficial to others, please let me know. Email me. I do want to tell good stories and wholesome stories and to just have some joy. We have an amazingly beautiful faith, just unbelievable. And we get so downtrodden with Corona and wearing masks and stuff. And it's fair because it is tough and it's not fun. But in the end, it's just not worth it always being miserable about it and only talking about it. And so I think it is nice to get on some lighter topics, or not even lighter topics, just some topics that will bring us closer to God, because I can tell you for certain, talking for a couple hours about the coronavirus will not bring us closer to God.
No,
but I think that's probably where we should end it. We're about at an hour now. So I don't know if you have any last words. I think we've got some really good stuff about authority. I think it was a really good comparison between the U.S. Revolution and the Cristeros and what our rights are, I suppose, in going against authority, according to St Thomas Aquinas, and just how we can have a joyful life rather than a miserable one.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing real quick that I wanted to say earlier, and we'll kind of close on this. That when I'd learned from, this was from a former CMRI seminarian who a beloved and shared the wisdom of Bishop Robert McKenna, the exorcist. And he said, when you're dealing in apologetics, especially if you're a layman, I think, rarely affirm, never deny, always distinguish. Okay. And it's one of the things I kind of wanted to do with the discussion today is even though I think that my approach on civil disobedience and whatnot is not quite the same as Eric's. It's not like I wanted to come on here and disagree with them. Instead, what we wanted to do is take a discussion, and if there's a place where you don't 100% agree, don't 100% disagree. Just take and dive deeper, because what you find is that the church in its wisdom sometimes lays out these broad boundaries, these broad parameters, in which case, we can have very discrepant views on things, but we can still both be within the Catholic faith. And as we drill in and start to look deeper into what the church teaches and what the great theologians teach, then we can really, I think, find truth. And that's, something that I'm hoping that I've kind of stepped away from the apologetics world, but it's kind of a message I wanted to get out there for anybody who is engaged in politics or is engaged in apologetics, is try not to go out and be offensive and throw your weight around and disagree with people and be obnoxious. Try to always go through and understand the theology of things, and just when you have a disagreement, dig deeper. Just dig and dig and dig, and usually you're going to find a place where you can finally agree on things.
Perfect. Yep. Sounds good. I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm sure, of course, we'll have you on again sometime in the future. I hope that anyone listening found this valuable. If you have any questions for either of us, please go ahead and email me at kevin89davis@gmail.com. If you have any questions for my dad, I'll go ahead and forward them on to him. If you'd like to support this podcast, go ahead and do so by Patreon or PayPal. Those links are in the show notes. So, Dad, thank you very much. And until next time, God bless.
Yep. God bless, Kevin.
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.